Happy Wednesday, everyone. Woo. Yes, we're back today on the traditional Scrimba Wednesday live stream. Yeah, and today I'm joined by none other than Scrimba developer Matias.
Hello. Yay.
Hello to you, Matias, beaming to us from very, very far away. Well, far away from me anyway. Great that you're here. In this stream, if you're all wondering, as I said, we're delighted to be joined by developer Matias for an introduction to NPM. Yeah, and if you're wondering, NPM is an online database of public and paid-for private packages called the NPM registry. That's ripped off the internet, in case you can't tell. If you're wondering what that actually means, it's a feature which allows you to add a ton of cool things into your coding projects without actually building them yourself. For example, this fun confetti. Woo! That's my personal favorite, but there's many more complex and interesting things you can do. So if you stick around today, Matias will talk us through everything you need to know to get started with NPM, including what is NPM and what can we do with it, how to actually get started with it, installing modules, what modules are, and the essential NPM commands. And of course, we do these things live, so we can answer the questions that you want to know. So leave them all in the chat. We'll get through as many as we can. I can see some of you have already done that. Super cool. But first, a big warm welcome again to Matias. Yay.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about NPM. It's such it feels kind of like you can reach out and grab anything in the JavaScript or Node world. There's so many things you can do both locally in terms of installing it to do something on your computer, or to do something for your server in Node, for example, to manage projects that are not node-based. There are many, for example, Rust projects where you have the whole build setup done through NPM because it's just so convenient and kind of ubiquitous. Everyone seems to get into it at some point. And of course, front-end and kind of full-stack development. So it seems to cover almost everything.
It does, yeah. Let's start by summarizing, if we kind of already done it, but for anyone out there who's still wondering, what exactly is NPM? Because if I've understood correctly, I mean, I've used NPM in part, but I don't fully understand it by any means. But if I've understood correctly, there's more than one thing which is NPM. Is that right? There's the packages and things, which you can find here, but there's more to it than just that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so this is npmjs.com, which is a company, and so they have certain things that they offer that are paid, but in general, I've very rarely run into a situation where I feel like, oh, there is something I need to pay for here. So typically, the company, because this is open source, everything they're doing is open source, they have your company's private NPM registry, in a sense. So there's lots more to figure out here on npmjs.com, but in general, that's the kind of company side of things, and then there's the executable kind of on your computer NPM that you run in your terminal that we'll talk about most today.
Brilliant. Yeah, looking forward to that. I'll let you be, I guess, the guide here, Matias, about how we're going to go through this stream. But a few things I wanted to talk about included how to get started with NPM. Is that a sensible place to start the stream?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. So I have my personal preference, and that's from several years of having worked in NPM using projects. So I have my way of doing it, but the regular way I would say to get started is kind of connected with Node. And so if we think about Node.js, what is that? It's a way to run JavaScript on a server or on your computer, and not for it to kind of live inside of the browser. Excuse me. And so um, the way you install Node, you end up having npm installed as well. So they kind of go together. So often you see that a certain version of Node is connected to a certain version of npm. So when you install it the regular way, then you end up having both. So I suppose going to nodejs.org or something like that, and then going through the install path there. Um, so maybe that is the easiest way to get started.
Sure. So let me know when, well, indeed, if you want me to share your screen.
Yeah, so I can share my screen now, so we can just take a quick look.
Okay. Here we are.
So here, and I'm streaming, so I'm trying not to do this tab, so we go into mirror pyramid mode. Here we are on Node.js, and you can see here that they have a certain version of Node.js, and if we download this, then we get npm together with it. So if you go through kind of the setup steps of getting started with web development, this is often something you'll do. So depending on your computer, you would download this and then install it, and then you would end up with this version of Node, and then an accompanying version of npm. But for me, I actually really like using something called nvm. So nvm, we didn't really plan to talk about this, but I'll just quickly mention it. There are several different ways you can manage Node versions. And so for me, let's say this little project that I'm in here, this is VS Code, by the way, and I hope it's large enough. Zoom in a bit more. Let's see if I do. No, never mind. That did not work. I'm just gonna make it a bit more visible. So Node Version Manager, NVM, is another way you could install Node and NPM. And I like this because it lets me kind of change NPM and Node to be the right version for any project. So for example, here, this is my little website that I'm trying to make like a digital garden with Obsidian. And so having having a specific version of Node here, I could, for example, do like a new file, nvm-rc, typically the way they're called, and then you can then in here say something like v16, something like that. And then anytime you change into this directory, so if I go into this directory here, I just did cd and then into the same directory to kind of force that, then you can see here now it found this nvm-rc, and then it changes it to 16, even though normally I use 18 these days because it's the release version. So again, you would typically go through this way of doing it, but I'm a big fan of having kind of this automated for me. So I like to do it this way, which also means that I can do something like nvm install. For example, I don't know, is v19 a thing yet? Have they started with that? No.
Not just yet.
For example, you could do that, and then you could do nvm use. So for example, v18, and then you can see here that it changes both the Node version and the npm version. So yeah, I'm a fan of that. And I think probably going just through the regular install way is a good way to do it. And so that's what I recommend you start with. And again, download it, install Node, and then you'll also have npm available. And so what that means is that you can then type npm like this, and it'll tell you what you can do with it.
Interesting. So I'm going to pause there. So that's how you can basically get started with npm. Just want to say quick hello to everyone who's here. Oh, Anna, hello from Georgia too. I would always pronounce this as flexempt, but it probably isn't pronounced like that. But hello, welcome back. Ciao a tutti. Lovely. And good afternoon from Johannesburg and Tanzania. Some questions coming into the chat, which are, yeah, very useful looking. So let's have a look at those. We have this from Hamza. Where and why would we use npm? I suspect you can do an awful lot of things with npm. What are the typical use cases, particularly for people who are nearer the start of their coding journey, would you say, Matias?
Yeah. So it was a pretty broad definition and overview I gave earlier, so I can see how that kind of covers a lot. But I would say to all the way in the beginning, it would probably be when you want to add something that someone else has made to your project, or because you need to install a way to get set up. So something interesting, which we'll get to a bit later in the stream, is that npm, you could run npm as a way to create a template project for you. And so often, all the way in the beginning, I would say the way you would start with using it would be to run some type of command that would create the project for you. So, for example, a started template, or like a skeleton project, or let's say to-do starter, something like this.
Cool. Sounds very handy indeed. One question someone has asked, which I had planned to ask anyway, is what's the difference between using npm versus yarn? So I know when you run certain things in the command line, you can either use npm or you can use yarn. What difference does it make? And is one better than the other?
Yeah, so yarn was born from a collaboration between Facebook and a few other companies. I think Google was involved as well. And it was born, as I understand it, mostly out of a frustration of how NPM used to work back then. So this was many versions ago, and it was not working as well as it is today. So back then, it was created as a way to kind of have an alternative. So you had some other choice, and there were certain specific things that they needed it for, that they wanted to use it for. Nowadays, they're mostly at feature parity. So they're mostly the same. So I would say, in general, it doesn't really matter if you pick one or the other. Some say that they feel like Yarn works faster because it does things in parallel. I haven't really noticed the difference. And some also prefer PNPM, but I'm only mentioning this because I know very little about it. But PNPM seems to be kind of compressed, a bit smaller version of NPM that does a few of the things that Yarn does, but specifically focuses on reusing existing packages kind of cached on your system. And so that's worth mentioning, that Yarn tries to really take what you already have on disk and use that instead of installing it kind of from scratch. I think NPM gets better at doing this for every install or for every update they have, but I think Yarn is still a bit better at reusing what you've already downloaded on disk.
Lovely. Thank you for the question there. Now, John answered in a brief summary, which sounds like pretty much what you said. Yarn is another package management similar to NPM. Is that pretty much right?
Yeah, that is a much more succinct way of putting it.
Very nice. Thank you, John, and thank you for the detailed answer as well, Matias. Slaven is wondering, what is NPX?
Yeah, so we plan to talk about this a bit later in the cast. Do you think I could do like a quick overview now, and then maybe we could take a look at it a bit later? What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, let's do that. Sounds good.
All right. So, for example, let's say we take this thing I mentioned earlier that you want to just create a template project. So you want the to-do starter app from a brand new cool framework. Maybe it's Imba, or maybe it's Redux, or maybe it's Remix. I mean, uh, whatever it might be, you're excited to try this new thing out. And usually you would need to do npm install for the package that would be used to set this up, and then you would do it probably globally, or it's kind of seems useful to have that kind of thing global in order to use it in any which directory. So let's say you install that globally, and then you call you run what you installed. So let's say that's Imba or something like that. And then you would give it some arguments to create like a to-do starter. Though all of those steps are required because you need to have it on your computer before you can use it, right? But the interesting thing with NPX, which comes with NPM, as far as I know, is that it kind of skips the step where you have to install it before you use it, and they just mush it into one.
Oh.
So, for example, let's say you're doing a cool new framework, space, create starter, space, to do, or something like that. Then instead of you having to first install cool new framework and then calling this command, you could then just do npx and then what the package is and how you would run it. I think npx. Yeah, I think you can actually call it like directly. So this then downloads the package for you and then runs it instead of you having to kind of manage all of that yourself.
Sounds awesome. Thank you for the question there. Love it. Also, I've noticed a lot of people in the chat saying hellos and letting me know where they're from, which is very nice, all around the world. So thank you for that. It's always good to see where people are tuning in from. And yeah, appreciate every one of you dropping on by, and all of you watching in the future. Hello from the past. Yes, where's best to go next with our demo, Matias? We've talked a bit. Yeah, I'll let you guide. I can give you some ideas if necessary.
How about we take a look at a couple of the npm commands?
Yes, essential npm commands. Let's do it.
All right, so if I can share screen, then we can take a quick look.
We are.
All right, so we saw earlier that if we do just write npm, if all we do is write npm, then we get this information. And if you're very new to using a command line, you typically have the same thing by calling npm help, or a faster version is just h. So npm h, we get some information about things that we can do. So here we see all commands, and that's a lot. I don't use most of these. Maybe I use like 3-4 of them at most. Really, what you'd be doing most of the time is npm install, and then npm run. So npm run takes a hold of things that are in your package.json file. And so that's a JSON file, so key on the left, value on the right, and you typically have specific things that you run there. So for example, you could start your project, or you could build it in order to make it ready for release, these kind of things. So we could go through a couple of these and kind of at the same time talk a little bit about installing things. So that's a larger topic, but we could just get started with that.
Yeah.
So so this is VS Code. So I just have the terminal at the bottom. So let's see, if I do screencast mode, then you can kind of see what I'm doing, maybe get you a little bit interested in Bin. So I'll move over to this package.json here. And so inside of this, you can see that there are several different parts of it. And one in particular is the scripts tag, or the scripts key, I mean. And so this nests another JSON. And so inside of here, you get to kind of type whatever you want on this side, and then you can run it. So let's not make this maximized, like this. So yeah, it's a little bit hard to see there maybe. So for example, npm run, it's a little bit hard to see, dev. So here, npm is, again, referring to everything that's local right now. If you want to run something globally that you've installed, then typically you don't prefix it. You don't write npm. So npm does stuff in this current directory. So then we have run, and that means that we kind of go into this part here, which I think maybe it would have been cool if they called it run, but maybe that would have been more confusing with other things.
Yeah.
And then we have dev. And so dev is a convention that's very often used, where you have some instruction to run also here in the command line, that will happen when this keyword is set. And something that's quite interesting is that you can technically skip this part and do it yourself, but I don't know the full implications of it. But technically, npm run dev, if I just press enter here, yeah, it's going to have some issues because, yeah, something. Probably I need to install some packages. So npm I to install just what's in the package.json. And so this thing here, you can see for this case, it's for Svelte. This thing here is something that has been installed, typically. You could do something else. So all of these are things that have been installed in this project, but you could technically do something completely different. So how about we do something completely different? And then we just say here, we echo out, yeah, something completely different. So echo is just a thing that's built into Mac or Unix systems. So it will kind of say back what it was that you were doing. So let me just make a new terminal here. So for example, here, npm run, what was it? Something completely different. And now you can see that we run this, and this is kind of the explanation of what is it that we're about to run. And then this is the result. And so we could put something else in here. We could put like change directory, or we could, yeah, probably don't do like remove f/ something terrible.
Oh.
But you can generally put whatever you like in here. But often what you would put is always something that has to do with what's been installed in the project. So what I was about to say was that technically you could run this yourself, but it's kind of convoluted. So let me show you what it would look like if we run this ourselves. So it would be in node modules, and then in the bin folder where everything's been installed, then you would find the executable, in this case, SvelteKit. And then we could have it run, for example, dev. So that's what you would do in order to have the same effect as here npm run dev. So same thing, but so much nicer and comfortable to write rather than kind of digging around inside of the node modules yourself. There are some other complexities here that I'm probably missing, like the version of what you're running and stuff like that. But I think in general, you would get roughly the same effect. But yeah, I'm off on a little sidetrack adventure here. When it comes to npm commands, typically you would do install, which we can talk more about later, but run covers all of these. And then you have other things like update to update the packages. So if we go a bit down, you can see we have devDependencies, and we can talk a bit more about that afterwards too. And we have dependencies. So these can be in any order, and it's a bit in a weird order for mine here. But essentially, these are the things that are installed. So if we look, we can see, okay, so it's not in dependencies. It's something that will, dependencies is something that kind of gets included all the way to the end. Dependencies is something that only kind of sits locally on your machine to help out. And so, so Svelte, and this one would then also install SvelteKit, and so that's what we have access to here up here. Yeah, I feel like that covers the main ones really. Npm install, npm run, and then many of the ones you're maybe used to seeing are actually just like words here. So we can see that we can add this this weird word here. So you probably won't see much of this in regular npm projects. Outside of that, I generally don't do much else. One thing that may be worth noting is npm start and npm test. These two are shorthands for the for I think start like this, and for test like this. And I think the reason they've included them so you don't need to do run start and run test is because they're so common that they wanted to give people a way to do them typing one less word. And that's often an argument for those that like Yarn, is that Yarn skips the run word. So with Yarn, you just type the command right after, typically.
Nice. So with npm versus Yarn, is that one of these things that's an eternal debate between developers? Or is there a consensus about which is better?
That is an excellent question that I just don't know enough to answer. I think at this point, it seems like it's what you prefer, essentially. So I prefer npm. I know there are many that prefer PNPM, which I don't know that much about, but I know that there are some packages that break with PNPM. And so once I heard that, I was like, oh, no, I never want anything to break for any other reason than my code breaking. And in a similar sense, I also feel like if there's anything wrong with Yarn, or if there's anything that breaks with Yarn, I don't want there to be yet another layer between me and the code. I just want it to be npm, which is basic and works.
Cool. Let's go now to some questions which have come in the chat. I'm not sure I fully understand this one, but I'll ask it anyway. That's always a good idea. When using npm, what files are required to be kept in the file structure for web pages? You know what this means, Matias?
I think we can maybe interpret this a few different ways.
Mm.
So let's say one way to interpret it is how to build a web page using packages with npm. Another could be maybe the difference between dependencies and devDependencies. And yeah, I suppose there are more ways to interpret it too. But just to take those two real quick, web page doesn't actually need npm to run. So a web page is just an HTML file. And in that HTML file, you have some JavaScript and some styles and some markup. And we typically use npm to bundle it and package it, and to maybe be able to write in TypeScript, so we can then turn it into JavaScript and put it in the HTML. It's kind of, it does things for us. But if you've ever done web development and then you kind of feel like, oh, I have to type npm start or npm run dev or something like this in order for you to see the web page, that's not actually the case. It does many convenient things for you, but the web page is just there, so it would work without npm. However, the second you involve the server, then you would need some way to run the server. And like we showed earlier with SvelteKit kind of in the node modules, you could run it like by hand, but it's nice to run it through npm. So typically, we install things and run things and kind of organize things with npm, but really it's Node that runs the server, for example, and it's your browser that just opens the HTML file or the other files. So npm doesn't actually need to be there for the actual website. So I suppose that's one interpretation and one answer to that
Yeah,
question.
that makes sense to me now, actually, because when I've been developing, I've sometimes had to do npm run dev or similar to see the website. But as you say, it's actually the server that's the issue, not the site itself. Thank you for that. Eduardo says, nice. Knocking stuff over. This is a confusing topic. I do have NVM, but I only use it to change versions. Oh, interesting. And that's it. And I'm trying out Yarn at the moment. So far, so good. On the topic of NVM, there was a question a bit earlier when we mentioned it, asking, is NVM a good way of checking and resolving compatibility issues?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I mean, it's kind of you who are checking for the compatibility issues, and you're the one resolving them. But NVM is a great way to switch between versions, so you can try it out. That's typically what I do. If something doesn't work and I get a really cryptic, weird error, sometimes there's kind of an alarm bell that goes off in my head where I'm thinking, this really should work. What might have happened that's kind of outside of the scope of the code? Maybe there's something that's kind of happening at the build level, or at the JavaScript version level, or the Node version level. What is actually happening here? Then I like to just hop back to a previous version. So, for example, I've been doing a lot of work on Node 18 recently, trying to kind of stay as up to date on the long-term support version as possible. But then sometimes I run across something where I think, this tutorial I'm reading, it worked for them, but now it's breaking for me, and I haven't changed any of the code. So it's probably not my machine. Let me see if it's actually Node, or typically it's Node, not npm, that there's something wrong with, or some incompatibility with. And so then I just do npm use v16, for example, and then I just install again. So npm install, and then npm run dev, or what have you, in order to try it out on a different version.
So this sounds a bit like something I came across today, actually, which was using Tailwind. In the Tailwind docs, it said, you can use this color. So I said, well, I thought, okay, I'll use that. And then it didn't work. But this came from the Tailwind doc. So I'm thinking, well, what's up with this? Anyway, after some Googling, I found out it was the version of Tailwind I was using didn't have that color. So could you use what you just described to test something like that?
Yeah. So because I'm so used to this tool, I kind of don't really think about it. But for me, it's just a way for me to switch quickly. And so yeah, in this situation, I would quickly hop onto an older version. And so typically, real quick, so 12 is very out of date now. 14 is quite out of date. 16 is kind of the older long-term support, and 18 is the current long-term support, or the one that they're focusing on. And 11, you probably haven't heard much about, or 13, or 15, or 17, but these are unstable versions. And so in general, you always want to hop pair numbers, not odd, no, even and odd, whatever it is called in English. You want to not go odd numbers. So yeah, I would hop to a previous version, try to follow exactly the same steps, and see if it works there. I think that's absolutely valid.
Interesting. Thank you for the thought-provoking question there. One other question which caught my eye, going back to your demo earlier, Alana wants to know, is this only applicable to the project you're currently working on, or does it apply to all the projects in your machine? So is what you were doing earlier, let me know if you want me to share again, kind of global, or do you have to do it for every separate project?
I don't remember what it refers to. What was that again?
It was when you were typing something completely different.
Oh, this wonderful new command I have here. So this is only going to be in the current project. So this is only something that would run here and nowhere else on your machine. Yeah.
Got it. Good to know. Couple of questions coming in on the topic of vulnerabilities. Kaya, I also want to know about vulnerabilities. I get them all the time. And Chagdas says, NPM reports vulnerabilities in my project. Then I run command fix force, and they are gone. What actually is happening is a mystery to me. And then slight smile. Why was it vulnerable, and how did it get fixed? Can we start with what are vulnerabilities? And where do they come from? And then what actually happens here with force fix?
Absolutely. So everything in your project. So I realized I thought I was sharing the screen a lot more than it was. So if it looked like I was referring to something earlier, then that was why. Could I share screen again?
Yep.
So here, all of these are different versions of packages, and so they follow something called semantic versioning, or semver. Semver, I don't know, where the top number is something where if this changes, then your code might no longer work because maybe they changed something big, or they added some huge new feature, they changed the name. These minor versions, I think they're called, are generally safe, but they may change kind of how things work. They can add things, but typically don't break anything. And these are I don't remember, bump version, something like that. Don't remember. And these are generally always supposed to be okay to update. So if we
look at these patches.
Thank you. Yes, patch version. And so if we look at all of these, they're kind of all over the place. This one is apparently still in beta if it has a 0, right? And this is on 7, and this is on 8, these kind of things. And so, and here you can see a kind of odd way of naming things where they've kind of gone beyond this, and they've said, okay, we're going to do our own thing at the end here outside of the semantic versioning too. So these are generally something to think of um, when you're updating because maybe something breaks. So let's say we just force updated all of these, then code that we've written around in our project, if this big version number here, if this changes, maybe our code doesn't work anymore because it's using a function that doesn't exist or something like that. And so really we're trying to, or NPM tries to update this for you and sometimes update this for you, depending on what this front number means. And so it's trying to kind of keep things okay and not mess with it too much for you. Now, all of this happens when we run npm update. So npm update, and these are always confusing. So update or upgrade, which one is it? Upgrade upgrades npm itself. Update updates the packages that you have here. So npm update will try to kind of follow this first symbol. I always have to look it up. I never remember what it means. I think this caret here means that the patch version can go up, but not something else. I don't remember. In any case, update tries to update them. But when we do force, it means that we are overriding what these little carets say is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, when there's a vulnerability, which it may show you that there's something that's like a minor vulnerability or a major or like a critical thing, different levels of these things, um, it may not always be able to fix the vulnerability and also stay within these kind of delimiters for whether it should update something big and then maybe break the rest of your code, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the version part of it. And so when we do update and fix, it means that we're trying to tell npm, hey, please fix anything that has vulnerabilities. And when we force it, it means, hey, fix it even if this could break my other code. Because often it is still okay, but sometimes it's not. So that's kind of the version part of it. Now, vulnerabilities, it's a little bit weird with npm, and I'm glad you brought up the thing earlier, Leanne, because if Node is the server and HTML and JavaScript and CSS is the website, then how can a package kind of be vulnerable? Because we haven't really talked much about this yet, but devDependencies, often people say, oh, don't care about vulnerabilities in devDependencies. I don't care. And the reason they say this is because devDependencies only gets installed kind of together with npm, but it doesn't really go with you out to when you're deploying your website. They may live on the server that you've deployed the website to, and they would be there to do like npm run something, but they're not used for the project itself. Whereas if we go down to dependencies, these do join. These do join with you for everything, and so these would go and be available for Node. And so here, dependencies, if something has a vulnerability here, that means that it's actually a bit dangerous. Maybe something can go wrong. So here, for example, remark is something that has to do with markdown and doing things for, well, let's do something else. So Slugify, for example. Slugify is something that helps create the kind of last part of a URL. So maybe you have an article and you want to turn the title of the article into the URL, like it's typically called a slug. If there's a vulnerability in that, maybe it's possible that if someone types something into that URL that has like a weird pattern of some regex or something, they're able to get some information through Slugify about files on your system or something like this. I'm making this up completely. It may not be possible. And Slugify has done nothing wrong. But just taking an example, if that's the case, then fixing the vulnerability could be really important, because it may be that your like deployed version of the website somewhere has a known way for the server to be somehow affected by hackers. And so often people don't take vulnerabilities and dependencies as seriously. Sure, they get installed on your disk, but if someone already has access to your computer and then does something with a node package of some kind, I mean, you already have bigger issues to worry about. Whereas for dependencies, this could be an issue, and it could kind of open you up to someone being able to attack or spam or hack or something with your server.
Wow, thank you for that very concise explanation. I hope that helped everyone who's asking about vulnerabilities. One I didn't mention earlier was this one from George. There's a debate about node modules. The Deno was introduced to evade the issue with node module size and security. Could you please explain about the major issues and vulnerabilities with Node, which you've done? What is this Deno? D-N-O?
Yeah, so the person that invented Node, so Node is essentially, ironically enough, it's C++ that's been written in a way to make JavaScript run on your computer. And we kind of take this for granted now, but quite a while back, this wasn't a thing. So you would just have JavaScript in the browser, and you wouldn't really run it on your computer. Now, we're very used to Node now, and this was created by Ryan Dahl or something, I think. And he said he regretted the decision to make Node because of some architecture choices he made. And the biggest one of those is that everything is so open and you can kind of do whatever you want. And it's kind of like the Wild West of JavaScript, but now it's running on your server or on your computer. And so he made Deno, which has the same letters as Node, but in a different order. And it replaces Node, which is kind of difficult to wrap your head around, because what replaced Node, that's JavaScript. But really, Node is a way to run JavaScript on the server, right? And so we do Node things. So this is not an accurate example. Thank you. Yes, sharing screen again. This is not an accurate example, but let's say we were on the server and we did things like these. Then this is from a package that we've installed. And we can also do things like import fs from fs. So this is the file system. So importing these things means that you can do fs like remove directory or something like that, and then bam, you just removed the part of your file system, or crazy things like this. And so what he has tried to do ever since he made Node and then kind of stepped away from the project and its whole ecosystem and world now, he has tried to find a way to undo some of what he felt was damaging with vulnerabilities and hacks and all of these things happening around the world, by making it more secure. And so in Deno, you would instead do import my package from, and then you would do github.com, my package, and then at some version. So maybe 42, something like that. And by doing this, you're saying you know exactly where it came from, and you know exactly what version it is, you know everything about it, and you're not trying to really do this through NPM as such. You're just saying, give me literally, give me exactly what's on this link. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is that if you do something like import fs, then this actually won't work in Deno, because to allow this, you need to toggle a flag that is kind of part of the Deno build process that lets you run code that can access the file system. And then that becomes kind of a permission switch. And so you have access to the internet, access to the file system, access to mess with files, access to all of these things are kind of granular control. And that's good because often you're just making a website. You don't want a hacker to be able to mess with, I don't know, the color picker that you have on your site that somehow connects to Node and then destroy files on your server. Because you never wanted your color picker website to mess with files on the server anyway. So
No.
it is
Definitely not.
generally a whole new, it's like a whole new thing, and a lot of people are really loving it. But it is only TypeScript, no JavaScript, and it's kind of a bit harder to get into. It's written in Rust instead of C++, so it's kind of forced correctness, and it's really interesting. So it kind of stops things simply by making you explicitly say yes, okay, to permissions instead of, oh yeah, everything goes.
Yeah. So I suppose my next question would be, well, why is everyone not using it instead of Node then? Is that just because it's new and slightly harder to use?
Yeah, I ask myself this question on a regular basis as well. I
Yeah.
think I think there's still enough things that are different enough that you can't just install anything and get everything up and running. I think there's still kind of like a borderland where maybe something written to suit Node doesn't work in Deno, and so they're kind of building compatibility over time, I think. But I do feel like it makes more and more sense with Deno and less sense with Node, unless you're doing something kind of quick and dirty, because Deno does. Generally do things better, and it's definitely a good direction to go. So kudos to the person that created both of these things, Ryan Dahl.
Yeah.
Probably many other people.
So is it a case of, CSS has all its quirks, let's say, but we can't get rid of it because if we did, it would break the entire internet. Is it a similar situation with that? There's so much stuff built with Node that until we get it to a point where they're basically cross-compatible, we can't always use Deno instead of Node.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And sometimes it may be difficult simply because far deep inside kind of the internals of some package, they do something kind of crazy and weird that Node never really meant for you to do, and Deno makes it impossible to do. And then you're kind of in this like undefined behavior world where it's okay in Node but not in Deno. So it's difficult to really get there. But I think it would be good if we could, because then it would make the web so much safer.
Totally. Sounds great. Georgia says, great, thank you for the explanation. Matias. Danny says, this guy's a boss. Yes.
Thank you.
Clapping. Yes. And another question we had was from Mohammed. You talked about package.json. What about package-lock.json? Is it important?
Yeah. This is often an annoying file in case different people on your project are using different versions of Node, which is another reason I think it's so nice with that little .nvm.rc file, because then you end up using the same version if everyone uses NVM. Yeah, so if we if we open up this file, my goodness, this is a huge file. There's so much stuff in here, and the reason for this is that this is Node's or NPM's way of saying what is actually installed on disk. Like what did we install? And this file is essentially the current state of your Node modules folder. So this is everything that we have. And if I install packages with one version of Node, and then I commit this package lock to Git and push it up. You pull it down, you do npm install, and then you have a different version of Node or npm or whatever. Then you update package lock, because then everything is slightly different, because maybe, oh, this version doesn't work with that version of Node, or only up to this version of npm, whatever it might be that these packages have different. So you end up with something slightly different than me, even though we thought we were going to be roughly on the same version, because we have the package file, right? And so here we said that we're going to be on this version, but this said, technically you can be in a slightly higher version. And also within this, you kind of have what's the dependency of your dependencies. So it's kind of like a black hole of Node module folders. And so we need this in order to know what did we install without having to upload the whole Node modules folder. And some people like this, some people are annoyed by this, but in general, it's nice because if you do npm install when nothing has changed, npm knows, and then it just says, oh, nothing's changed, and then it immediately finishes. Otherwise, it would need to kind of go through all the files and check, oh, is this actually the same version that I thought it was? So it's a good thing to have, definitely a good thing to commit and to keep in your version control, and nice to use together with nvmrc. So you're all on the same version.
Perfect. One final very important question from Alexander. What font are you using in VS Code? Looks amazing. I was wondering this myself.
Cool, yeah. So let's see here. Let's pop open here. So these are, oh my goodness, I have a lot of VS Code settings. 6,000 lines. Font. So I'm using Yosefka.
Yosefka.
Which is quite a nice font, and the website lets you do small tweaks when you download it. So mine might look slightly different from yours, but I think in general you'd be able to get the same one.
Beautiful. Yes, thank you for that. Wow, 1 hour has whizzed right on by. I think I speak for us all when I say once again, as Danny said, this guy's a boss. Yeah. Oops, wrong number. Let's try that again. Sorry about that. Yes, what I was aiming for is a ta-da sound. A boss, indeed. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Matias, for coming and sharing all your knowledge about NPM. Very enlightening. I feel like I know a whole lot more than I did at the start of the stream. I hope everyone else feels the same too.
Very happy to. Thank you for having me. And all the great questions. We had some talking points, and the questions kind of jumped straight through them and got us to some really great deep dives. So I think it was all of you that made this good as well.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for the thought-provoking questions, as Matias said. We are back. Well, I'm back on Friday with Michael discovering Tailwind. I haven't really used Tailwind before, but I had a go with it today. And here you go, Pumpkin's amazing Tailwind page. Look at the amazing button effects you can make. Yeah, super cool. So I'm looking forward to that indeed. And next week, we have something very exciting coming up, which is a LinkedIn profile review. Yes, we are welcoming Austin Henline from LinkedIn to review your profiles. Yes, give you some tips on how to optimize your LinkedIn so recruiters and hiring managers come to you. So I hope you can all join us then. If you liked this, please consider giving Matias and I a thumbs up and maybe subscribe so you don't miss future streams. Any closing thoughts, Matias?
If you can get comfortable with some of the things that we talked about today. For example, NVM, NPM, NPM run, then I think a whole world opens up for you. So if you've kind of been on the edge and not quite sure if it feels like a lot, I strongly encourage you to jump in, see if you can just install a package and use it, because really it's like the whole world of JavaScript and Node opens up to you when you start using NPM.
Absolutely. Words to live by indeed. Well, that's all we have time for. So thanks everyone for coming, and see you again soon. And thank you again, Matias. Bye now.
Bye.